All right, everybody. Well, welcome to the Dallas Film Podcast, sponsored by and hosted by Southside Studios. My name is Tony Armour, and we're excited today to have Craig Whitney and Estefania Hernandez with us today. I know I'm always bad with anything but English and German, so I apologize. I do that all
That's all right. Whenever I have to pronounce Nahuatl words, like Mexican indigenous words, it's a it's the same struggle.
Yeah, and I always feel like if I were to try and say anything with a proper Spanish accent, I would just totally bastardize it anyways. So I just do it in my bad American accent, and hopefully everyone will understand.
But we always appreciate the effort. I mean, it doesn't matter if you butcher it. If you give it a try, it's great for us.
Yeah, I think people feel that way all around the world. Even when I travel, if you're in Europe, I speak a little German, but when I go to Germany, I was just at Berlin Film Festival. I never end up having many conversations in German because people hear that the American accent and they just speak English back to me, unless I'm in a taxi or an Uber because they're always Turkish and they don't speak English, but they speak bad German and I speak bad German, and I have amazing like full length conversations with taxi drivers all the time, and so I look forward to like my taxi rides around Germany because those are the people I get to actually speak German to, which it's a strange little thing, but it seems to work.
Yeah.
That's been my experience too. Like, if you're making a sincere effort to connect with people, they're usually willing to meet you halfway. You know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you are both in Mexico City, and Craig, you started to say that you had spent a lot of time in Austin. Now, did you grow up in Austin? Were you born in Texas and ended up going to Mexico City? Talk me a little bit through.
I, so in Spanish, the question, "Where are you from?" Literally, that question, it means where were you born, because in Mexico it's the same thing. And for me, I have lived at various times in my life in Louisiana, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, back to Pennsylvania, East Texas, Central Texas, California. So I can't really explain that phenomenon to Mexicans because it's a completely foreign way of life. But usually, when people ask me, "Where are you from?" I say Austin because I lived there for 13 years before I moved to Mexico City.
Now, were you a military brat? Is that how you ended up moving around so much, or was it just
Oil industry.
okay, somewhat similar then, right?
Somewhat similar.
And Estefania, where are you from?
I am Colombian. I was born in Bogota. And then after 20 years, my dad had also a very incredible job opportunity here in Mexico City. So the entire family moved here. So I've been living here in Mexico for the past 20 years.
So
Mhm.
that's home now, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I've never been to Mexico City, but I know several people who've gone, and they love it. They say it's amazing. And Mexico City had an amazing opening in the James Bond film from a few years back. That was super cool too. So, and that's the extent of my Mexico City knowledge. Unfortunately, is when it's featured in James Bond film, and my friends just telling me that's a really cool place to go.
It is a world class city on par with New York, Los Angeles, Tokyo, Paris. It is, I mean, what is it, 20 million people, Steph, something like that? There's like
20
there's like
people, yeah.
three world class symphony orchestras, one of the greatest museums in the entire world, the Anthropology Museum. It is a really incredible place to live.
Yeah. And so you just called her Estef. So am I allowed to shorten it and say that as well?
Of course. Of course you can.
Awesome.
Mhm.
You just made my life so much easier for the next 45 minutes.
That's great.
Well, we don't have accents in English, so the accent is on the I in Estefania, but
Yeah.
but we don't. It's something I still struggle with, writing words in Spanish. I mean, if I have autocorrect on my phone, it'll put the accent on the right word, but I spent 35 years of my life not thinking about what vowel has the accent on it, and then to suddenly have to start doing that, midway through my life's journey. It's it's not, it's not second nature yet.
Yeah, no, of course I get it. Absolutely. Um, so, so now that we've covered the where are you from bit, what are you doing in Mexico City then? So obviously, as far as the Red Note, which we're going to talk about today, there's that podcast that is highly successful, and the film, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're still working on getting the film made. This is a narrative feature based on the podcast, and it's not a documentary, but it's going to be a narrative feature, and so you haven't shot that yet, correct?
That's right. I can take you through the history because it starts with me in Texas. Uh,
Yeah, okay.
so I wrote this film several years ago while I was still living in Austin, and started the process of developing the Red Note movie, which is a featured drama inspired by the story of the femicide in Ciudad Juarez, and it tells the story of one family's search for answers after the disappearance and death of their daughter. And I say their search for answers deliberately because, on the one hand, they are searching for answers in a criminal justice standpoint, trying to apprehend the perpetrators, but they're also searching for answers in terms of how they go on with their life after it's shattered into pieces. A lot of the families that we spoke with during the production of the podcast, talked a lot about that struggle, about not just confronting the government or trying to push the authorities into taking action, but also um, the personal struggle that they went through. I hate to say processing because it seems to it downplays the enormity of the pain that was put on their shoulders. So it's about both of those things. It's not just a true crime story about let's track down the killers. It's also about how do we as a family move forward when something is broken that can never be put back together again? How do we remain united as a family? And how do we avoid our own pain coming out and inflicting it on the people that we love?
Yeah.
So
And so, no, I was gonna say, so you started writing this as a feature script when you were in
that's right.
Texas, and then where do you get involved in this? Like, are you a part of that process? Did the two of you know each other while you were starting to do this before you moved to Mexico City? Steph, if you've been in Mexico City for 20 years, kind of walk me through that as well.
Yeah, well, no. Of course. So Craig did the entire writing of the script during Texas and like that. And then we met through an acquaintance of both of us, which is somebody that we want to invite as part of our film crew in the future when we have our narrative film done. And she introduced me to Craig. I was starting as a production coordinator for a very important production film house here in Mexico City. And she thought like maybe I could be a good producer for that narrative and for that story or something like that. So, and that's how Craig and I met. That happened like almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And one of the things that I really catch my eye was that when I read Craig's script, talking about this very sensitive issue that still, unfortunately, still happens here in Mexico, I could see that he made the homework. He did the research, he did talk to the people that he needed to talk. He even did a field journey. He went to Ciudad Juarez, he met people over there, and everything, all that work, it was reflected in his script. I have a bachelor's degree in anthropology, in social anthropology, and that was something that obviously for this kind of subjects, it's something that also was very attractive for me from the story, and seeing how it was treated, how it was written, how was the approach. That was something that really, really interested me, and that's the reason why I decided to collaborate with Craig on this particular story at the beginning.
Yeah, and Craig, what inspired you to write the story? Was there something personal connected to this, or did you just, you were familiar with what's been happening and thought it was something that needed awareness needed to be raised? It was a good backdrop for a story. Why this story?
Well, you know, when you fall in love with another person, it's kind of like you can't imagine your life without that person, you know? And when you decide to direct or produce a feature film, you're going to spend several years of your life developing, financing, producing, post production, distribution. You have to have many compelling reasons. It's not just one thing, it's many things. In my case, um, my family moved to Texas in the late 90s. The femicide in Ciudad Juarez started, the traditional date is usually 1993, although it's quite probable that there were cases of femicide or disappearance before 1993 that were just not, the connection wasn't made. But so it took several years before the press in the United States kind of got wind of what was happening on the other side of the border. And that was right around the time that my family moved to Texas. And so it was something that in the late 90s, I was reading about as a teenager. I've always been very interested in just kind of like international affairs and human rights issues. And so it was something that kind of caught my attention as a teenager. A few years later, there's a band from El Paso called At the Drive-In who put out an album that, they always say about the Velvet Underground that only a few thousand people bought that record, but every one of them went out and started a band. And that At the Drive-In record just was so powerful to me, and it made me want to go out and create art. And there was a song on it about the femicide in Ciudad Juarez, which was incredibly compelling as a work of art, but it also was incredibly compelling because of the subject matter. And so again, it kind of gave me this vague idea that I wanted to like write a poem about it or something like that, and I never did. But then several years later, I was reading 2666, the novel by Roberto Bolaño, the Chilean novelist, which is about the femicide in Juarez. And I was thinking about, I had done a short film a couple of years before that was really successful. It won the Texas Filmmakers Showcase Award from the Houston Film Commission, and it started kind of making me think, okay, I'm ready to go out and make a feature. What should I make a feature film about? And I started reading 2666 by Roberto Bolaño. And as I'm reading this like 1,000-page novel, I just started going, here's this thing that I've been interested in for like 20 years that I had this desire to make art about. It's such a rich subject matter in the sense that it touches on so many just fundamental questions of human existence, family and the government and human rights, and just, it touches on so many profound questions. And also, I lived in Texas for close to 20 years. It's impossible to live in Texas for that long and not have your life be touched in profound ways by the Mexican American community. And during the time that I lived in Texas, just going through personal difficulties, my life was impacted in very profound ways by by some acquaintances of mine from the Mexican American community, and so um, the film is also for me, an expression of gratitude towards people who touched my life in very profound ways. So again, going back to my original point, like you can't spend several years of your life working on a movie just because that's you wake up one morning and you feel like making a movie about something.
Right. Yeah.
It has to not just check a lot of boxes, but it has to be something, a rich enough subject matter that you feel drawn to. And also, I think maybe I left this out, but it's also a project that has the potential to put something really positive out into the world, hopefully to make a positive difference in people's lives.
Yeah, there are a lot of layers to it, obviously. And you mentioned, the media starting to cover the story in the late '90s, and why people became more aware of it. And Steph, what is that like in, that's obviously, say American media paying attention to this story that crosses both, U.S. and Mexico. But then what is that like in Mexico knowing about this? Like how much is it covered? How prevalent is it? Is this something that, you were hyper aware of prior to reading Craig's script? What's your familiarity with the story? And I mean, obviously it's pretty obvious, like when kind of know what the story is, why someone like yourself would want to get involved with that project. But Craig talked about that sort of deeper level on why it means something to him. For you, what was that awareness level, and on that deeper level, why does this mean something to you?
Okay, that's a very interesting and complex question because it does have a lot of layers. And I mean, first of all, Latin America. This is something that it's not only a Mexican issue, it's a Latin American issue. And me being a woman and having that experience as a Latin American woman, I've been at some point kind of affected by it. I mean, about the misogynistic kind of situations, about situations of machismo, not only from Latin American people, but even from people from other countries and other kind of nationalities. When I had the opportunity, like to have that interaction with them. So that's one thing. The other thing also goes to the societal and the political issues around it, because this is a very, I mean, the reason why we have femicides in Mexico, it's also a consequence of a lot of the political and societal issues that had happened not only through the entire Latin American conflict that we had with nar- narco traffic or something like that, but also with our relationship with other countries as the United States. You know, it also have like all of that. And talking about if I was hyper aware about this issue before reading Craig script, absolutely. I
Of course.
mean, talking about feminism and talking about femicides in Mexico, it's one of the greatest issues, and a lot of people even says that the feminist organization as an association that we have here are right now the opposition politically
Hmm.
speaking towards the government. And we, as feminists, and a lot of very great feminist leaders, have written and gone to Congress and make law bills that have passed. As Olympia Melo, with all these things about the cyber attacks against women on their internet, or even some of the victims of femicide, there are some laws that were passed here in Mexico, for example, to not expose them in photographs in the newspapers because they are so graphic in their deaths. So, and a lot of that kind of things are the reasons why the feminist movement here in Mexico and in Latin America has gone so far into the politics of the Latin American governments and even between the relations with another countries. So for me, it's really important to talk about this issue because I mean, there has been a conversation in Mexican cinema, in Colombian cinema, Brazilian cinema, talking about these gender issues since the 70s. I mean, there's a lot of movies that you could find talking about all this kind of stuff, maybe around documentaries or maybe around narratives, because they do exist. But one of the things that it does kind of differentiate the red note, that it's the project that we want to talk about right now, is that for me it's really interesting to talk about the subject from a perspective of someone who is maybe outside, seeing the problem from outside, but at the same time it's not trying to make it an action movie, or it's not
Sure.
trying
Yeah. It's not
to
like the rescue
trying to
movie where the
gain
guns blazing. Of course. Yeah.
exactly trying to approach to it in a way that we can finally have a dialogue where everybody can held accountable about what the wrongdoings have been done or the right things that we have been doing, and obviously putting the focus on the people who is important for this story, which is the mothers and it's the families of the victims. No, and try to do that from a perspective where we're not making a re-victimization of the people who've already have been a victim, who have been murdered, who have been violented in some kind of way. So for me, that's the reason why it's so important to talk about this, so important to put out another film about this, but trying to see precisely that's the complexity about it, because
Yeah.
it needs a lot of layers and it needs a lot of voices to try to put them in a position where we can hear all of us, and it's a lot of voices. Maybe at some points you can go deaf because it's so many opinions around it, but for something so important as this, for something that we as society we need to heal, and in the state of the politics right now around the globe, it's something that it's really interesting, and for me it's really important to put also on the table, to keep trying to have that introspection, trying to have that analysis, and trying to have the dialogue between people.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. My girlfriend here in Florida, and we've been together for a long time. A few years ago, she had a friend of hers from work that was from Texas, moved back to Texas, and her and her sister and her daughter traveled into Mexico for something, and this is maybe 3 years ago, and have never been seen or heard from again. And I went to a wedding in Mexico this past November, and my girlfriend refused to travel to Mexico to go to the wedding. She's like, I will never step foot in that country, ever. Not after what happened to my friend, how she just disappeared, and hearing stories like this. And so I think, you know, it has an effect on the individuals, of course, and their families. And then you talk about sort of the broader political view, but then you can go even broader than that and talk about how people's just view and impressions of, let's say, the safety of, traveling to Mexico for a wedding. And, when something like that happens, it has such bigger things that affects many, many people, in lots of different ways. Um, what I guess this has obviously been going on for a long time, and you created the podcast about this. What are the theories on how and why? Is it as I'm sure it's never simple, right? But is it as simple as it's cartel related, and it's there's is the road of death that the road that they talk about, is that the one that you're talking about in your Juarez? Like, can you just inform me a little bit more about you know about it, and or anybody that's listening, they may not be familiar with it.
Well, it, that question evolves a lot depending on what point in time you're asking it.
Sure. Yeah.
When the murders and disappearances first started happening in the 1990s, the authorities in Ciudad Juarez tried to blame all of the murders on various scapegoats. There was an Egyptian man living in Mexico who was arrested and charged with all of them. And then when the femicides continued while he was in jail, the authorities started saying that he was paying a gang to continue the murders while he was in jail. I mean, what you kind of see in the 1990s is that the government became interested in it when there was an election, until the election happened and they lost interest, and another election would happen and they would um, spend a lot of effort trying to track down the killers, but they ultimately weren't very interested in getting to the bottom of it. It was more like they were just kind of interested in getting the problem off of their desk. So I think that if you're trying to look at this, I mean, why were hundreds of women murdered and thousands disappeared over a period of 20 or 30 years? Well, there are a lot of different reasons for it. And I think ultimately, going back to the point Estefanía made about the kind of anthropological elements of the script, the reasons are more to do with forces within Mexican and between Mexican and American society than they are to do with who or what group, or I would say it's kind of a confluence of factors in Mexico, as Stephanie, you said, machismo, government corruption, infrastructure problems in Ciudad Juarez. I mean, when you have to get on a bus at 4 a.m. to travel to the other side of town to be at your job, it's a lot easier to get kidnapped when you're on a bus after dark than it is if you're, the presence of criminal groups in Ciudad.
Yeah, it's almost like this is these are the femicides are the symptoms, not the problem, right? The problem is much larger, and this is a result of the problem and not truly the problem itself.
The
Exactly.
way the film approaches this question is, I've had people look at the script and say, well, you never tell us who the killers are. And I say, well, the killers are on screen for the entire movie. It's
Yeah, that's the point.
it's
The whole point is, yeah,
poverty, sexism, government inefficiency, globalization that caused all these factories to be built in Juarez, sex trafficking, the infrastructure. It's all of these things, and they were all on screen for the entire movie. It just doesn't operate like an Agatha Christie story where, at the end, Hercule Poirot says, it was this cartel that killed her. It's
yeah. We want someone to blame, and we want to say we've caught the bad guy. The problem is solved. Let's move on to the next
And
thing.
I think that the
Exactly.
goal of the film is to not let the audience leave the theaters feeling like they caught the bad guy. The goal of the film is to kind of put a stone in people's shoe where they walk out of the movie and it creates something that nags away, and hopefully that is either a catalyst for them to find out more, a catalyst for them to get involved and talk about this issue, a catalyst to make more informed decisions about what they do with their lives, because this isn't just a problem that affects Juarez or affects Mexico. The drugs that are trafficked through Mexico come from where Stephanie is from in South America, and they end up where I'm from in the United States. Like, this is a multinational phenomenon of what's happening in
Yeah.
Ciudad Juarez.
Sure, yeah, and obviously the drug problem isn't the fact that they're making drugs and transporting. The problem is that people want the drugs. You eliminate the people wanting the drugs, and then the drugs, go away. So, as Steph, as the producer of the film, it hasn't been shot yet, and you have this amazing podcast that I'm assuming the podcast was created as a way to tell the story, because it's much easier to do a podcast than it is to create an entire feature film, right? And you can raise some awareness and kind of build an audience. So I'm very familiar with doing that on projects of my own that I've worked on over the years. But so where are you with the film? Like kind of what's happening next, and as far as actually getting the film made?
Well, right now we are in the developing and in the financing stage. So we've already have some partners that already have come into the fruition of the film. We're around the
About a third.
well, about a third of the financing, and we're still looking for investors, and we're still looking for some other partners who want to join us to
Sure,
talk
of
about
course.
precisely this kind of subject and trying to make this film happen.
Now, will the film will be shot in Mexico, or a combination of Texas and Mexico?
The
What will?
idea is to shoot everything here in Mexico, in the state of Chihuahua. We're trying to, I mean, in the moment that we already have the financing in place, we're going to start doing like the entire pre-production. We've already have some agreements on the table to make that happen. So in the moment that we have that financing, I think that this is going to be really quick. And
You'll
yeah,
utilize the Mexican film incentive as well to, or what's the kind of the budget range? Now I'm starting to get into the nitty gritty of filmmaking. We covered,
That is
the political topic.
Tony, that is a very, very complicated question. You're going to get
I just complicated.
We haven't really gotten too much into the podcast, and I think it would be great to tell you a little bit about that, because that came about. Our producer Will Wallace, who I met through mutual acquaintances, brought the project to Imperative Entertainment, and Imperative came back with the idea of doing the podcast. There was their head of business and legal affairs, Laura Caulfield, helped kind of set this up, and they proposed the idea of, and really it was Laura's idea of doing the podcasts. Imperative had launched a podcast division, and it took us a minute to wrap our minds around the idea, and Laura and Will kind of really were the voice of wisdom, and kind of said, hey, this is an opportunity to show that our team can tell this story, and also to build an audience for the feature film. And so the podcast, the film is a drama. The film tells the story of one fictional family, and the podcast was an opportunity to explore the entire 30-year history of the femicide, how it evolved, what caused it, just delve into all these facets of this very, very complicated story that we can't delve into in 2 hours.
Of course, yeah.
And the podcast really informed the film in very profound ways, because we learned so much by talking with people that it made us, it gave us the ability to see things from a different perspective. And as I said, it also helped us really build a huge audience for the feature film. The podcast was number one on Apple True Crime or Spotify Society and Culture charts in 13 countries. It was the top 40 on Apple True Crime in 54 countries. It was nominated for Best Spanish Podcast at the iHeart Podcast Awards. And it was a really, it was a great proof of concept for our team, but it was also just an incredibly rich and rewarding experience for us to get to go to Chihuahua, record the podcast there, talk with so many people who have been working on this issue for in decades in some cases. And it was
really a journalistic endeavor, basically, in telling the whole story.
Well, I think I want to be modest about that, because I mean, there were journalistic aspects of it, to be sure, but I mean, we met real journalists doing the podcast. I mean, we got to do some baby journalism,
Yeah.
but we got to meet. I mean, I don't know. We worked with an incredible journalist from Juarez named Alicia Fernandez, who used to work at El Diario de Juarez, which is like the New York Times of Juarez. And I mean, she was telling us stories about how many times she's been shot at and just all of these incredible things that you go through. And I mean, we there's one of the things about this story is that in a lot of ways it's about the worst, ugliest aspects of Mexico. But in a lot of other ways, this is about Mexico at its best. I mean, the incredible reporters there are in Chihuahua, the amazing advances in forensic science that they've accomplished in that state. But I think above all else, the resilience, the determination that the families of the victims in Ciudad Juarez have become an example for the rest of the country. There's a father we had the privilege of speaking with during the podcast named Jose Luis Castillo. His daughter Esmeralda disappeared about 10 or 15 years ago, and he has traveled across Mexico for the past 10 or 15 years. He shows up at every march to not just to talk about his daughter, and to make sure that her memory lives on. But his story is so painful, and yet he has become an incredible symbol of hope for this country. And so this is a story about a very dark subject matter in a lot of ways, but this is not a dark film. This is a film that I hope will be life affirming for the people who see it. And
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a great point, right? You're making this, the topic is obviously very heavy, but if you can find a way to make the film still hopeful at the end, that would be quite an accomplishment. That would make it a hit. Steph, I know this is a film podcast, so I wanted to, get a little bit more into the nitty gritty of the film aspect. Like you're saying, you're in the process of development and raising funds and putting it together. What's that been like? I know from personal experience and from being in the industry for 20 plus years that it is really hard to raise money for films. And when I started asking about the Mexican incentive, I know that's one of those things that's like it's up, it's down. It's like, do you have money this month or not? And I've known projects that were to shoot in Mexico, then don't end up shooting there for one reason or another. Just talk me a little bit through more of the the work that you're doing to get the film made.
Well, the truth is that it's a very work team where Craig, it's the other part who has had like one of the heaviest part of trying to also try to find the financing, because as you well put it, yes, here in Mexico we do have an incentive, but the Mexican incentive, it's really prone to go to Mexican filmmakers. And the reason is that because we have Craig as the director, as that one of the most important elements of the entire project, we decided to go other way. And the other way is that maybe we should take advantage precisely of our producers, like um, Jennifer, Ivan Weiner, Karen Criswell, um, and Craig, as one also as the producer of the film, where I decided in conjunction with them, like maybe we would like to make a financing in the US way, no more
Yeah.
in Hollywood way,
Yeah.
because precisely here in Mexico, yes, you have the incentive, but that incentive is one of the most competitive incentives that you'll ever meet in your
Yeah, no, I hear this from European filmmakers constantly, the amount of European filmmakers who don't want to shoot in Europe because the national funding sources that they have, they say it goes to the same five filmmakers every
Well,
year.
it,
And
it happens
Yeah.
kind of the same thing here.
yeah,
It does happen kind of the same thing here. And not only that, it's so competitive because it's a really great grant. We're talking around $1 million that you don't have to repay to your investors. It's a very attractive incentive. But precisely because of that, the Mexican government and the cinematography institutions here are very protective about it.
of course.
No, so they are not going to let them, they are not going to let people from the outside of the Mexican film industry to take advantage of it.
Yeah, yeah, they're very risk averse, and they know who's been successful before or who they like, and yeah, it's
Exactly.
I
it
remember.
all.
So for kind of that kind of situations, that the reason why we decided, and there's another thing. I mean, I do really believe in the diversifying when you're trying to achieve something.
Yeah,
You don't put your all your eggs in just one basket. You try like to diversify your options. So if you go through the Mexican incentive, maybe you tend precisely to do that, to put all your eggs in just one thing. So, and because it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of time, it's really time consuming trying to apply to that incentive and everything. So, for me it was smarter, no, trying to work smarter was okay, why don't we go and do it like the US way, how independent films in the United States are funded, and let's try to achieve maybe something in that route. And one of the things that it was so interesting and was so rewarding, at least for me as a producer and for Craig and everything, was precisely that we achieved the podcast in that financing journey. So, okay, maybe it's not a thing about money, but it's a thing that we build our audiences, that we had the opportunity like to bring our talent and the story of these families and all the thing that we've already have been working. I think that we were working already like 4 years on the script and on the development and everything when we got the opportunity to make a podcast, and we had the opportunity to bring that and put it out there. And thanks to that podcast we have had a lot of great opportunities like this interview right now, no, and a lot of other things that it's going to help us a lot to keep building that audience, to keep building that trust, to keep building that proof of concept, no, and
Hey,
try bringing the financing.
yeah, and so an interesting question then, financing. I actually just taught a workshop the other night on alternative methods of financing, including crowdfunding and grants, to go along with your traditional investor raised financing. Uh, are you planning on doing anything in that respect as well? Maybe from like a crowdfunding perspective? And I say that because, now something that's worked very well, the Chosen TV series is a great example. They've been able to essentially crowdfund, 6 seasons of a show where now to the point of, 5 million an episode. Probably the most successful crowdfunding campaign in history is what they've been able to do. And then Angel Studios with the Sound of Freedom, film that they released last summer, and they had a pay it forward thing where at the end of the film you scan the QR code, you buy a ticket for somebody else to go see the film. Since you have the podcast doing this interview, it seems like it'd be a great opportunity if you had it set up to be like, go to our website, the rednotemovie.com, and there's a Patreon link there where you can donate to be able to support the film to help get it in the future. Is that anything you've considered? Or did I just give you an idea? I'm not going to take any credit for
I
it.
mean,
But,
no, we have talked and we have like trying to evaluate like all the alternatives that we have. Crowdfunding, obviously, yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things that we have on the table. I mean, the thing is that it's trying to understand the mechanics around it to make it successful.
sure.
That's kind of the
Crowdfunding in and of itself is a job to
Yeah. Well,
exactly.
and unless you've got, I mean, unless you're extremely fortunate, I think most films get financed kind of like a potluck supper where,
Yes.
you bring the potato salad and Estefania makes the chicken and I bring the lemonade, and we all have a picnic together. And so I think probably like most independent film projects, the final financing is going to be some, ad hoc combination of grants, equity, pre-sales, the whole kit and caboodle, and we are
Oh,
entirely agnostic about that.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to be able to, as we're starting to wrap up the podcast here, I want to be able to tell the audience, if this is a story that sounds like something they would want to get behind, how do they get a hold of you to be able to say, hey, this is something I'd like to support you in some way if I can. Now, I'm not saying that our audience is going to be rushing out to send you checks, but you never know. Maybe there's one person who listens to this who wants to somehow get involved or help.
They can go to therednotemovie.com. They can send us a message there. We have accounts on all social media platforms, also at the Red Note Movie. So, people can reach out to us there. And those are all.
And the podcast is just called the Red Note Podcast as
There
well.
There are actually two versions of it. There is the English language version, the Red Note, and there's the Spanish language version, La Nota Roja. So if someone wants to listen to them, they can search for the Red Note or La Nota Roja on any podcast platform, and they should be able to find us pretty quick.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for hopping on the Dallas Film Podcast, brought to you by Southside Studios in Dallas today. It was great having you. I know I could talk for another hour and just keep learning more about this, but we're out of time. Maybe we'll have a sequel. Maybe there'll be an episode 2 down the road here where we can continue the conversation. Or, as you progress and you hit some milestones, some things continue to happen, you get cast attached, things like that. It'd be great to circle back.
We had a great time, and we would love to talk with you again.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.